Thank you, practitioners. We have all experienced change in our lives. Some of us have moved, we've changed jobs, there have been deaths that we've had to deal with. We've experienced divorce or separation of some sort. Currently, we're all experiencing the changes caused by COVID. It seems as though it never ends and it just keeps going. One day we're in quarantine, the next day we're not, and we can go out. Sometimes we're required to wear a mask and other times we're not. All in all, it can turn out to be a very frustrating experience. Ganesh, or Ganesha, are we up with our elephant yet? There we go. Ganesh, or Ganesha, as he is known by the Hindus, and you'll notice that he's a blue elephant, often portrayed as a blue elephant. And he is he is also the Lord of all existence beings. His parents were Lord Shiva and the goddess Parvati, and I hope I'm saying these names correctly. Legend has it that he was told to race around the universe and around the world, and instead of going around the world or around the circumference as he does, he walked into the center of Earth where his mother and father were, and who are the source and the center of all existence. To the Hindu, they are the center of the world, Lord Shiva and Goddess Parvati. Regardless of where we're attempting to go, we're presented with obstacles along the way, just like Ganesha was. Just a simple journey across town presents us with many challenges. There's stoplights, there's pedestrians, there's traffic jams. As simple as it may seem, those are all obstacles that we're forced to overcome. We can't avoid those challenges. We must go through them to get to our final destination. Ganesh teaches us that we can't always go around something. Part of the journey is to go through it. The obstacles that we experience on any journey are presented as a reminder that our outer walk around the divine, our source, is our purpose to move in for the living. I also believe that obstacles are presented to us so that we can go within ourselves to the source and to heal, to grow, to learn, and then move forward with our life. It's about that inner wisdom that we get when those obstacles come up and we're forced to deal with them. It's a wake-up call, and it's time for change to happen. In Buddhism, Parjana Garbha, hope again I'm saying those correct, means the womb of wisdom. And according to Mark Nepo, wisdom must be brought to full term and given birth. The truth of any experience can only be released when we embody the wisdom that is waiting to be born within each and every one of us. Obstacles are a way to embody that wisdom. How many times have you said, "Oh, I wish I had known that before this happened," or "I wish I would have observed that before"? That's an opportunity for us to embody new wisdom that was born out of the challenge or the obstacle that was presented to us. Holmes tells us, and we all know Holmes is our wonderful founder, tells us in the Science of Mind text, to change our consciousness and false conditions will disappear. That is about embracing new wisdom by going through an obstacle, not around it. It is amazing how when we change our consciousness, obstacles and challenges can be overcome and disappear in our lives. All too often in America or Western civilization, we're obsessed with problem solving, however. We think it is our task to eliminate obstacles. Unfortunately, that does nothing for us to relate to the challenges so that we can grow and find the important inner wisdom that is waiting for us to discover. There are 3 stories as to why Ganesha or Ganesha has a broken trunk. Each provides an important perspective of the Hindu beliefs. What I think is even more important than the myths about the mask is the symbolism behind those Hindu beliefs. The Hindu believe that a wise person is beyond duality. Furthermore, duality is created by the mind, which believes that the ego helps us to survive in this world, not spirit. Duality is the screen that keeps us from realizing our real, genuine self, which is beyond our body and our minds. Once we transcend that duality, we see the entire universe as a single whole, and we become aware of our true selves. The single broken tusk of Ganesha symbolizes non-duality. Wisdom allows us to see all as one and ourselves as an integral part of the whole. Just like all those children singing together. They were all together, even though they were in different parts of the world. Once again, we can see the wisdom of Dr. Holmes as he teaches us about our oneness with all of creation and the divine. There is no such thing as duality. The broken tusk reminds us of our own brokenness when we're faced with an obstacle. At some point, we must make a decision. Do we run around our challenge trying to avoid it, or do we open up and run to it to change and to grow? One of my favorite authors, Parker Palmer, in Let Your Life Speak, reminds me that if you turn around when a door is closed, you'll get a whole new perspective, a whole new view of your world that opens up to you. Sometimes our anger can get in the way of moving through an issue. Initially, when Ganesha's trunk was broken, he would throw it at the moon repeatedly out of anger. He finally gave up. And when it was returned to him numerous times, he just decided to accept it as it was. Sometimes our stubbornness gets in our way. We all experience change in our life. It is how we choose to respond to it that molds our future and sustains us and provides us with that inner wisdom that we need. Stubbornness keeps us in our own self-imposed prison. Typically, we become entrenched in our beliefs while we wait for others to change, because after all, it's their fault, not mine. How many times in the last year have you heard someone complain about the anti-vaxxers? How many times have you experienced your frustration with those that don't believe like you politically, and then you start shouting at the TV, "You idiot!" How many times have you thought if they would only get a shot, the entire thing of COVID, this whole monotonous mess would be over and done with? The list goes on and on. We expect others to change, which in essence is walking around the challenge rather than moving into it and through it. We expect others to conform to our beliefs and our goals, which only generates an atmosphere of anger and disappointment and frustration. The dictionary defines disappointment as sadness or displeasure caused by the non-fulfillment of one's hopes or expectations. I underline that word, expectations. A person, event, or thing that causes disappointment. We have expectations of others. We expect them to change. Based on our beliefs, our background, and our experiences, we create our own set of expectations. And when our expectations do not come to fruition, we're not only disappointed, but often we experience a sense of failure. If we are unable to get others to change their perspective, we then become frustrated and angry, just like Ganesha and throw our trunk at the moon. It is our task to move into that space and place of center to understand why this is so important to us and what can we learn from the actions of others. It forces us to adapt our expectations and sometimes even change our beliefs that we have so stubbornly clung to for so very long. About a year ago, 3 of us decided to chance an adventure since we were tired of staying put in our homes. We hooked up my trailer and we headed out for a new adventure in national parks in Arizona and Utah. Our first obstacle was my truck transmission, which blew 2 hours outside of Chico. Talk about adapting. This changed the entire trip as we sat for 4 days waiting for the new transmission to be installed. Then everywhere we went, there were crowds, believe it or not, in these national parks, a lack of space for our camping to happen, or it was the facility or the program was closed that we wanted to see. Once again, we needed to adapt our schedule and the route we were taking. What started out as a formalized plan created over dinner by 3 people became something completely different than what we had ever expected. COVID and a vehicle challenge forced us to change and adapt our journey, and it was wonderful. If we had not, we would have had a totally different adventure and been miserable. So often we are reluctant to work with what we are given. I love the story of Isaac Perlman, the great violinist who was playing a concert in 1995 at the Lincoln Center. And he started out as he always did, and he was playing so beautifully, and all of a sudden a string popped just like that. There was stunned silence in the audience. What was he going to do? Was he going to stop the concert? Was he going to call for a new string to be replaced on his violin? Everyone knew it was impossible to play a classical work with only 3 strings on the violin, and yet he kept going. Concert attendees could see him adapting and changing and recomposing the piece as he went along. Afterwards, Perlman commented, "You know something? Sometimes it is the artist's task to find out how much music you can still make with what you've got left." Perlman didn't fight what had happened. He surrendered and adapted to the limitations that he was given. He focused on the strings he had left, and new music opened up within him with what was initially a constraint. How was it that Monet could paint water lilies when cataracts covered his eyes? How was it that Beethoven created the Ninth Symphony when he was completely and totally deaf? The difference between them and us is, do we allow limiting challenges to prevent us from moving forward? Or do we go within by surrendering and finding something new that leads us in a new and potentially greater direction? In the practical application of The Science of Mind by Ernest Holmes, he states, "Our lives and experiences may very well be likened to a river. If we change on the bank of the river and watch it flow, we can become aware of the fact that the river never changes, but that it is constantly, always new. By analogy, we might say that the purposeful, dynamic quality of life within us never changes, but the content of our experience of living never, ever remains the same. God and we are in constant flux with interchange. God is as the banks of the river never changes, but what happens within that river is in constant creativity as it flows. We are the same way. Our outside form may change a bit as we age. Our hair changes color. We stoop a little bit. Our bodies begin to sag. We change a little bit. but the flow within inside of us is constantly creating. What happens today may be similar to yesterday, but it is never exactly the same. Every storm opens an opportunity to a new path, to a new way of being. We can resist and deal with frustration and anger, or we can surrender and change. Buddha was approached one day and they said to him, "Are you God?" He replied, "No." "Are you an angel then?" "No." "Then what are you?" they asked. Buddha replied, "I am awake." Often we enter situations of change, of numb and frustrated, anxious to avoid what we're being called to do. Buddha, in his simple statement, "I'm awake," is telling us to stay present in this moment. In those simple moments of being present, our perception may shift and change. Our inner voice may deliver a message. We may hear or see something that changes our life in just a fraction of a second. It will only happen, however, if we're willing to surrender. Fear gets in the way of being present and open to change. As the Course in Miracles states, fear is not the present, but only of the past and the future. The voice of fears sounds something like, "What if I lose my job? Does my spouse still love me? Will I have enough money to retire on and be able to survive?" Our ego mind or voice of fear is constantly busy within us. Fear leads us to resist any changes that would help solve our existing challenges. It's like not going to the doctor because they might indicate you need surgery, you might have cancer, or some other challenging disease. Avoiding the doctor doesn't avoid the situation. When we run from the truth, we are running out of fear, avoiding the present moment. We're rejecting an opportunity to heal and grow in wisdom. Excuse me. Think of fear you have right now that may be standing in the way of you accomplishing something or changing a situation in your life. Just take a moment and think of what that fear is. Macy, would you put up our affirmation there? I'm going to use COVID, for example. COVID has no power over me. COVID has no place in me. COVID is what I imagined it. I'm so sorry. Oh boy. Let me try that again and I'll put a cough drop in. COVID has no power over me. COVID has no place in me. COVID is what I imagined it would be like if love were not all. So I cast down my fears and imagination of COVID back into the sea of nothingness from whence they came. I know that it is finished in the name of Christ. Go ahead and say that to yourself silently, please. Such a simple statement, but what a difference it can make in your beliefs. Meditation can quiet the mind and open us to present moments and new wisdom. Meditation can assist us in dealing with change. It can be the essence of ease and grace. After all, it is the process of letting go of the things we are tightly holding on to. And it's about releasing patterns that hold us to the past. There are a multitude of ways to embrace change in our lives. Staying in the present moment, enhancing our fears, and meditation are only a few of the icebergs, or the tip of the iceberg, of practices that will guide us to a place of inner wisdom. I'm sorry, folks. There was once a teacher in a small town in Texas, and her life had become very ordinary, as well as boring. One night she attended an incredibly boring PTA meeting, and this was after a day of 30 squirming little first graders who were restless and drained her energy. Her reading class seemed to get bogged down, and the principal arrived all of a sudden at noontime, demanding the report that she was supposed to turn in. Both playground periods were hot and gritty and windy and dry. And then Mrs. Jones showed up upset at the end of the day because her daughter, Mary, had been moved from the top reading group. By 4 o'clock, all she wanted to do was go home and sit in the hot tub and have a glass of wine. That, however, was not going to happen, since a speaker, an educator that was quite well known, had been hired to come in and talk to the teachers about being professionally minded. The longer the speaker talked, the more she became bored and the less professional she really felt. Later that week, as she drove her weekly 50-mile trip to take her master's classes, she bottomed out, and she began to think about, what is it I'm really trying to do? What am I trying to teach? Why am I here? And in that moment, she decided it was time for a change. She was going to quit teaching. She had had it. She was done. It was time for her to write a book, maybe go into a new profession that she hadn't thought of before. Tonight would be her last night in class. She was done. On a break, the woman sitting next to her said, "I met an admirer of yours this week." And she looked at her and said, "Oh, really?" And she said, "Who?" And the fellow student indicated that she had been at the bus station to pick up her son, and there was a little Hispanic girl and her mother sitting next to her as she waited. And she began to speak to the little girl and talk to her, and the little girl told her they were on their way to Colorado to join her father. She was so proud to be a second grader. Then she took out a worn billfold and pulled out a photo and stated, "This is the teacher I really love." And she said, "I was astonished as I recognized you." Here was this picture that was worn, partially torn, faded, and ragged, and yet it was one like her most prized possession. When I told her that I knew her, she and her mother beamed and jumped up to give me a hug. The teacher's mind went back through all of the students she had had to the week or the year before. And she asked, was it Mary? And she said, no. Was it Maria? And she said, yes, it was Maria. And the teacher went home that night, and she did some really deep thinking about herself and what she was doing. She pictured that former student, Maria, pointing to her picture saying, "This is my favorite teacher. I really love her." And it was then that she renewed her decision to change. She would not change her profession. She would rather change her attitude. We can spend a lifetime throwing our brokenness at the moon like Ganesha did, or we can heal our fears and surrender to the divine within. The choice is yours to either move forward in ease and grace, or fight the flow of the river. This is the truth in my life, and this is the truth in yours, and so it is.